Hi, and welcome to week 2 of ALCE 5204. Today in this module we're going to go over some of the readings that you did this week, focusing especially on the prologue in chapter 1 from the book by Tom Schwant. But before we do that, I'd like to just pick up where we left off with the activity, which you've all done, on the scenario analysis, which the purpose of that activity was just to give you practice in identifying and questioning assumptions, because I believe that doing so is a very important part of being an evaluative thinker. So now, before we move on, take a few moments just to think for yourself about how in your own programs, whether you're planning, implementing, or evaluating a program, how you could be more of an evaluative thinker and how that could help you question assumptions, see things more clearly, and get to more valid results. Also, before we get into the readings by Schwant, I want to just emphasize how important these guiding principles for evaluators provided by the American Evaluation Association really are to guide our practice anytime we're doing evaluation. Now, these are certainly important for anyone who wants to do evaluation as a job or as a profession. It's an important part of the professionalization of a field that there are certain standards and principles for that practice. But even if you don't become an evaluator and you just do evaluation sometimes in the course of your job, no matter what line of work you're in, these are still really important ideas to keep in mind about being systematic, having certain competencies, being honest and having integrity, especially having respect for people, and thinking about how your work as an evaluator or doing evaluation contributes to the public good. So these are kind of a touchstone. I actually have my copy hanging on my wall, and certainly these are ideas which we ought to come back to throughout the semester, and then as you go out and do more evaluation work, something that you can refer to from time to time. Okay, so to help us think about the readings, what I'll do is actually pose a series of questions which other students have posed in the past, and also some questions which Schwant poses himself in the readings. And I'm going to encourage you to think about your own answers to these questions, and I will also provide some of my thoughts. And one sometimes frustrating thing, but it's the way it is in social sciences in general and in evaluation, is that the most common answer to many questions is, it depends. So it depends on the context, it depends on what you're trying to do, it depends on your background and your positionality, how you approach the world, and that's okay. A lot of what we will do this semester touches on that, and really a theme that will run throughout this entire course is when you answer these questions in your own way, it's just important that you're able to back up your decisions, provide a rationale, provide a justification. So early on here, I don't expect you to be able to do that, and that's okay too. But so we're certainly going to start off with more questions than answers over these next few weeks before we move into the really nuts and bolts, the how-to of how to do evaluation. So be ready to have a little bit of uncertainty or even some discomfort as you wrestle with these new and difficult ideas, where I might present something on one slide and then you say, okay, I think I get that, but then on the next slide it might seem like there's a contradiction or there's a set of questions which is unanswered, and that's really what Schwant is talking about in this book, how in the practice of evaluation, just like in any professional practice, there remains a great deal of variability. So this is true of evaluation, but it's probably true of other professional practices as well. Now, some professions have very clear standards. for instance, social workers might have a set of criteria and behaviors and competencies that they're supposed to adhere to. Someone working in an agricultural certification program has clear types of knowledge that someone has to demonstrate before being certified. Now, that's true, but at the same time, everyone acting within that profession has their own way of doing it. There's no way to possibly turn everyone into robots where they're all doing exactly the same thing. So think about your own profession, your own whatever content area you are in, and from the introductions, it's very clear that we have a great diversity of backgrounds, some folks in agriculture, some folks in community education, and from other fields as well. And so just think about in your own work, in your own practice, how much variability is there? How much is it up to you about how to decide what you should do, and how much standardization is there? And in your own field, and then we can apply that to evaluation as well, is that good or bad, or is it mixed? So again, this is something we don't necessarily have the answer to. Tom Schwant, in his book for evaluation, presents two approaches around page 15 or 16, where one is an approach where evaluation ought to be really standardized. Everyone is following the same technical procedures. But then he talks about a second view, which says that some amount of variation and variability is okay, that it's okay for people to use their practical wisdom to adjust to a given situation and to decide, using their expertise and their best available knowledge, decide what to do in that given situation. As Schwant points out, this is very much related to the pros and cons of professionalization as a field. Different fields are more or less structured in terms of a profession. Many professional fields, such as medicine and a lot of technical fields, you need to have a certain certification that's governed by a board, either by the state or the federal government or a professional association, in order to do that. As I mentioned last week, that doesn't exist in evaluation except for in Canada and Japan. But so here in the United States, if starting tomorrow you want to call yourself an evaluator, you can do that. However, there's some drawbacks, because if I'm the president of a small community-based organization and I know I need to do an evaluation, and I just find some random guy off the street who says he can do evaluation, I don't know if I'm getting a quality service or not, because there's not enough standardization. So this is another question where it depends. I like the idea of having an open, a broad tent that lots of different practitioners can go underneath and say, okay, I'm an evaluator, I'm going to help my organization evaluate our programs better. But there's also a certain, we need to pay attention to what competencies are needed, what principles are applied, and what certification or credentialing, if any, is needed for someone to be an evaluator. So this is a big question that Schwant brings up, and we'll be coming back to this time and time again. But he makes it very clear that for him, an evaluation must involve valuing, making some sort of value judgment. And it's not always clear how evaluators do this, how you get to that final value judgment. Clearly there needs to be some criteria of quality, of goodness, of what you're looking for. But values sounds kind of subjective. It sounds like, okay, you value that, but I value this. So if evaluation is supposed to be objective, how do we deal with this question of values, and what do we even mean by values? So we'll be returning to this question throughout the entire semester, but it's certainly something I'd like you to think about now. So here's a more technical question, and one that we can actually answer for a change. Schwant introduces a few different types of evaluation, and he makes this important distinction between monitoring and evaluation. Now this is a really big deal in international development work. You really actually don't hear the term monitoring in the US very much at all, but in international context, you will always hear people talking about M&E, which stands for monitoring and evaluation. So as Schwant points out, the real difference is monitoring is focused on, as the program is being run, just as sort of a technical process of checking in that benchmarks and goals are being met. It could even just be something as simple as if the program is supposed to be following a certain timeline. Monitoring could just be a checking to see that the program is on that timeline. Whereas evaluation tends to come more towards the end of a program in this context of M&E, and also pose broader questions about the sometimes the effectiveness, or at the very least focused on the outcomes of the program. Did the program meet its goals, or did the program have positive outcomes for the community? Developmental evaluation is another relative innovation within evaluation, two terms which you should have seen in the readings as well, which I don't have up on the slide, but those are the notions of formative evaluation and summative evaluation. So formative evaluation is a little bit like monitoring because it happens while the program is still being run, and its real purpose is program improvement. So you say you're a cooperative extension educator and you start a 6-week program. Well, you don't have to wait till the end to figure out if the program is good or not. After week 1 or week 2, you can use some sort of systematic inquiry to try to check in on how things are going. And then you can use the results of that formative evaluation to adjust your practice, to adapt your practice to try to make the program better as you run it. Then summative evaluation is once the program is over, you step back and try to make a summative judgment about the value or the quality of the program to see, was it good, did it meet its objectives. There's a number of different approaches that could be considered summative evaluation. Now, developmental evaluation was basically invented by Michael Quinn Patton, a scholar who we'll be hearing a lot from throughout the semester. He's a real leader in qualitative research in general, and also utilization-focused evaluation, as you saw last week. And he invented this idea of developmental evaluation, which we introduced last week, but which Schwant then provides some more information on. And basically, it's an alternative to formative and summative evaluation. And I think of it kind of like an organizational coach. So someone who is external to the program or external to the organization, but is embedded as well, has an interest in the success. So some people might see that as bias, but bias is everywhere, and even an external evaluator who comes in to do a survey on your program has their own biases, and even in choosing what questions to ask on that survey, there's bias baked into that. So a developmental evaluator has to just proactively manage his or her biases as well. And then he or she uses systematic inquiry, evaluation approaches, to help the program adapt in the face of complexity, to try to adjust on the fly and really almost build the plane while they're flying it, as they say, so it's different from formative evaluation in that sense, because in formative evaluation the program is already planned. There's a maybe an outline of activities that will be offered week by week or what have you. But in developmental evaluation, the evaluator then becomes really a consultant, basically, to help develop the program or the organization as it goes. Then both the Trosham website, which hopefully you also checked out, and the Schwant readings do a good job of sharing the diversity, the plurality of the different types and purposes of evaluation, and also of what the purpose of evaluation is in society. It serves many, many purposes. So let's just take a glance really quickly at one table from the Schwant book, which shows a good snapshot of some of the different types of evaluation, each of which has its own distinct purpose. So this is from the book, and as you see, it just lists a few different types, such as implementation evaluation, program monitoring, and those two certainly have a lot in common. Process evaluation, which is looking at the mechanisms by which the activities of a program are supposed to lead to an outcome. Then outcome evaluation, which focuses on the outcomes, so changes in knowledge, attitude, skill, behavior that are the desired, usually the desired outcomes of the program. Sometimes it's important to look for unanticipated outcomes as well. Impact evaluation is a particular term that often requires a certain methodology which is sensitive to causation. It's a methodology or a data collection approach that can really let you make stronger claims that this program caused that outcome. Now, impact evaluation is very popular for a lot of funders, but it's not always appropriate depending on the context and what's feasible. Remember, we need data and conclusions which are credible, accurate, useful, and feasible. So we'll return to this a great deal even later in this module about whether an impact evaluation is always necessary or appropriate. Then efficiency and social impact types of evaluation look a little bit at the cost benefit and the cost effectiveness to see if this investment in this program is contributing to the common good in an effective or efficient way. So there's certainly some overlap between these different types, and I don't expect you to memorize them or anything like that. It's just to get a rough sense that there are different types of evaluation that are appropriate for different programs in different contexts, to know that there's a lot of different tools. So here I've pulled out a pretty long list of questions that Schwant himself poses at the end of chapter 1, and I'm not going to spend too much time on them, but I think they're important for us to at least think about a little bit. So here is an interesting one. Should evaluators work as change agents? So are evaluators, and is the act of evaluation just a technical question about gathering objective data on what is, or is the evaluator and the evaluation an opportunity to intervene into the world to try to do something different? People, really leading scholars, come down on different sides of this. The going notion these days is that, yeah, evaluation should be a tool to make the world a better place. So in that sense, evaluators should be change agents. But it's still an interesting question about what that looks like in practice and how that's done. Getting back to the big question about value and merit and worth, who gets to set the criteria? Is it the participants, the administrators, the educators, the funders, somebody else, the evaluator? It's hard to say, and this ends up being done in a lot of different ways. But now that we're in this course and we're thinking more carefully about evaluation, we can start asking ourselves the question, okay, when I'm doing an evaluation of my program or my organization, who comes up with the criteria about quality, merit, worth, significance, value? Also related to the big value question, should an evaluation report or the results of an evaluation be just a collection of small results or findings, or does that report need to synthesize everything into one summative, final, end-all, be-all judgment about the program or the evaluand? Depends on your approach. This is also a question we'll return to basically throughout the entire semester, and this pertains also to Schwant's notion of being a reflective practitioner, because it really does depend. There's no back of the book guideline where you can just flip to the back page and look at a chart or a table and it will tell you what methods you should use. It depends on so many different variables and factors, but I'm going to help you hopefully try to understand what questions you need to ask yourself in order to answer this question, to figure out what is the right tool for the job. Should I use a survey? Should I use a focus group? Should I use observation? Should I use quantitative data or qualitative data or mixed methods? It all depends, but there are better answers and worse answers, and like I said before, the only important thing is to be able to justify and back up whatever decision you make about a question like this one. Then we'll encounter this quite a bit. What is the role of the evaluator? Is it as coach? Is it as detective? Is it as chopping block to try to cut a program or try to keep a program going? Is the person internal to the program or external? Are they paid for by the funder or paid for by the program implementer, or is it the program implementer herself or himself? What are the different roles? Evaluators play lots of roles, oftentimes involved in program planning, so helping people create a logic model to articulate the program's theory of change. That's not necessarily evaluation, but as an evaluator, it's something I do almost all the time, helping program implementers better plan and better articulate the theory behind their programs. What values, whose reality counts, whose voice counts? These are all big questions that really get at the heart of what is good evaluation. The various purposes. Why are we doing the evaluation? Is it for program improvement? Is it for accountability to a funder? Is it to contribute to general knowledge? Is it to, sometimes governments will request an evaluation because they already want to cut a program, or because they want to produce some sort of publicity material for a program. All sorts of different uses, and it's important to think about what is the purpose of the evaluation. Okay, this one we've already touched on, the role of the evaluator. What are the roles of stakeholders? So stakeholders are just folks who have some sort of interest or are affected in some way by the program. So it could be the participants' families, the program implementers, so the educators or the agents who are doing the program. It could be administrators, funders, it could be society at large, it could be politicians involved in the area where the program intervenes. Lots of different stakeholders, and the different approaches to evaluation that we'll be learning about over the next few weeks, they all have different approaches to getting stakeholders involved. And then this, if there's one thing you remember from this week or from this course, the most important question in evaluation is what counts as credible evidence for evaluation and applied social science inquiry. And so Tom Schwant's book really does a good job of this. A lot of the readings we'll have from the textbook by Donna Mertens and Amy Wilson really help answer this question. It's been a big debate over the years, as I'll touch on in just a few moments. But what counts as credible, acceptable, valid evidence of anything, of a program's success or failures? This is not an easy question. So it's something we'll have to come back to time and time again. And very much related to that is, and this gets back to the what methods should evaluators use question, is how do we best use methods to get credible evidence to understand something about a program? Do we use experiments? Do we use deliberation, so dialogue? Do we use phenomenological rendering? That's a very fancy research term from qualitative sociology, talking about how to study a phenomenon or to study reality in real life. So it's sort of like ethnography, to go out there and observe what's happening. So that would be phenomenology, to observe the phenomenon in its natural state. So they're all very different, these three examples, and they're just three among many other examples. But the question remains, what is the best way to try to understand the world around us and to render judgments about the value, the merit, the worth, the significance of a given intervention or program? So to sum up these questions, many of which remain unanswered, here are some considerations I'd like to leave you with this week as we move forward. One is the importance of being a critically reflective practitioner, using that practical wisdom that you've accumulated over your schooling and over your career, over the different jobs you've done, to let you judge a situation take in evidence, consider different perspectives, question assumptions, and make decisions. So essentially being an evaluative thinker. So Schwant refers to some work by Argyris and Schoen on reflective practitioner and this notion of single loop, double loop, and triple loop learning. So people end up interpreting this in different ways, but this is an approach that I think makes sense. A technical approach to a given situation focuses just on single loop learning. So what are we doing, and are we doing things right? That's a very technical question, technical approach. But then as we learn more and as we apply our practical wisdom more, we can start unpacking those assumptions through double loop questions, double loop learning, asking, are we doing the right things? And then at an even deeper level, sort of what we could call metacognition, thinking about thinking, is a way to look at context and practice triple loop learning, which is asking, is this, not only is this the right thing to do, but how do we decide what is right? So Argyris was not an evaluator. He was more from organizational development and sort of educational research a bit. But I think this notion of single loop, double loop, and triple loop learning is very salient. That's why Schwant, his whole purpose for writing that book and using that nice title, Cultivating a Life of the Mind for Practice, was to think about how we as evaluators or as program implementers, how we can use better critical reflection to not just do things and do them well or correctly, but ask those bigger questions about, is this the right thing, and how do we even know what is right in this given context? Secondly, and this really comes out in the Schwant readings, and we'll come back to it time and time again, the question of what counts as credible evidence, which I've already told you is probably the most important thing to take away from this module and this course. For years, as Schwant points out, it was a debate between people who are in favor of quantitative methods versus qualitative. So in a nutshell, quantitative just means that the data are numbers, and qualitative means that the data are words and everything else, images, things like that. So really a separation between numbers and words and other types of concepts. So that debate, which raged within not just evaluation, but sociology and psychology and education research, in a sense that debate finally calmed down in the 1990s, but it has been rekindled since about 2001 or 2002 through these debates about what makes an evidence-based program or an evidence-based practice. Maybe in your line of work you hear people talking about this. Oh, we need to be evidence-based. Our central administration has said we need an evidence-based program. But what do they mean by that? Very often they mean different things, but in evaluation, very often they're talking about doing a randomized controlled trial. And they call this the gold standard of impact evaluation, or the gold standard of evaluation in general. Now, we don't have time to get into the details, the technical details of a randomized controlled trial, but if you haven't heard of this before, very briefly, it means that in order to evaluate the outcomes of some program, some intervention, you get a group of people, say 100 different people, who are more or less similar. They live in the same area. Maybe it's an equal mixture of races, ethnicities, genders, socioeconomic status, and then you randomly divide them in half, not haphazardly, but randomly, using an actual, there's this thing called a random number generator, where say you assign everybody a number and then sort of mix them up so that who goes into one group and the other group is literally random. And so then you have the control group, which is half of the people, and then the treatment group, which is the other half. And the treatment group gets the program. They get to participate in the program, whatever that program might be. And then you use the same data collection tools to do a pre-test before anything happens, and then a post-test after the program has been run. So The idea being you get to compare the change that happened for the participants to any change that may have happened to the people who weren't even participating. And then that gives you an ability to make a stronger claim that, hey, my program caused this. Now, it's a very elegant methodology. It can allow you to make strong claims, but it also has its limitations, and it is not always appropriate for a given context or a given program. So we'll come back to this throughout the semester, but I just wanted to point out now that this is a very important consideration. Finally, we started out talking about the guiding principles, which are fundamentally about how to be an ethical practitioner, how to do what is right. And we saw from the Trosham reading online from the Research Methods Knowledge Base about ethics in research, which really pertain also to ethics in evaluation, about the need in many cases to get Institutional Review Board approval or IRB approval. And I just want to point out as the last consideration that if you are doing an evaluation which you're going to be sharing publicly, then that technically counts as research, and you probably ought to get IRB approval from either a university IRB or a private IRB, which are out there offering this service. But I want to say that the questions about what is ethical don't end with getting IRB approval, they just begin there. There's so many more, as a critical reflective practitioner, there are so many more ethical questions, triple loop type of questions of, is this the right thing to do? Is this the right method? Is this program needed in this community? Am I bringing my cultural biases and my preconceived notions into this program? How do I treat participants? Do I make them fill out really long surveys, or do I invite them in from the outset to help me create the evaluation questions and decide what we're even going to ask? All of these are considerations which ought to be taken into account when you are doing an evaluation. So with that, I thank you, and thanks for bearing with me through this long but I think important PowerPoint presentation. And as always, feel free to reach out and ask me any questions you might have, either about the form or the content of the course, as we keep moving forward and covering these various introductions to evaluation basics. Thanks, and have a great week.